A millionaire's son had to marry in a week to secure his inheritance, so he chose a girl on a blind date. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It is quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let us return to our main character. The clock was ticking, and for Daniel Whitmore, every second felt heavier than the last. At 29 years old, Daniel was not just another bachelor wandering through the glittering skyline of Manhattan. He was the only son of Richard Whitmore, a self-made billionaire whose empire stretched across finance, real estate, and technology. Yet for all the wealth surrounding him, Daniel's future was now hanging by a single thread, a clause hidden inside his late mother's will. To inherit the estate, the lawyer had read aloud in a conference room, lined with mahogany shelves and gold-framed oil paintings. Daniel Whitmore must be legally married within 1 week. The words struck him harder than any business rival ever had. A week. 7 days to find a bride in a city where trust was scarce, and everyone seemed to want something from him. It was not romance. It was not destiny. It was a legal countdown with billions at stake. Married in 7 days? His cousin sneered over cocktails that evening. That is impossible unless you hire an actress. But then again, Daniel, maybe that is all a wife would ever be to you, just someone playing a part. Daniel ignored the sting, but his thoughts churned. For years, he had resisted his father's pressure to settle down. Love had always felt like a performance staged for tabloids and shareholders. And yet, here he was, cornered by a paper document signed by the woman who had once tucked him in at night, the woman who had believed that marriage was more than a transaction. He stared out the window of his penthouse overlooking Central Park, the city alive with honking horns and glowing billboards. What his mother intended as a safeguard now felt like a trap. But he knew her heart she had wanted him to find someone genuine, someone who could see past the fortune. The problem was, Daniel did not have the luxury of time to search for genuine. He had 6 days left. That was when his best friend Michael tossed an idea onto the table like a grenade. Blind dates. Quick, simple. And you will not be using your last name. No one has to know you are a Whitmore. If she says yes, you marry. If not, you move on to the next. It is brutal efficiency. Daniel almost laughed. Him, the heir to one of America's largest fortunes, speed-dating strangers in dimly lit restaurants? But as absurd as it sounded, desperation had a way of stripping pride. And so, with the inheritance clock pounding louder than the New York subway beneath his feet, Daniel Whitmore, the billionaire's son who had never needed to chase anything in his life, walked into a modest Italian cafe in Brooklyn for his first blind date. He wore no tailored suit, no designer watch, nothing that screamed wealth. Just a plain navy shirt, jeans, and a jacket that could have belonged to any ordinary young man. As he stepped inside, the aroma of fresh bread and roasted garlic wrapped around him. The chatter of families, the clinking of glasses, the hum of life unfiltered by luxury softened something inside his chest. And then he saw her. Sitting near the window was a young woman flipping nervously through a small sketchbook. Her hair was pulled back loosely, her sweater frayed at the cuffs, and her eyes, when they lifted to meet his, held no recognition of the last name Whitmore. For the first time in a very long while, Daniel felt a moment of silence in his soul. He slid into the seat across from her, unaware that this stranger, on this blind date born from desperation, would soon turn his life upside down in ways neither of them could have imagined. The waiter poured water into their glasses, the faint clink breaking the silence between them. Daniel cleared his throat, steadying himself. He had handled billion-dollar negotiations, hostile takeovers, and boardroom battles. Yet here, sitting across from a woman he had just met, his palms felt uncharacteristically damp. Her name was Emily Carter. She lived in Brooklyn, worked part-time at an art supplies store, and spent her evenings sketching scenes of the city. Her sketchbook was filled with pencil drawings of fire escapes, crowded subway platforms, and street musicians who never made it into glossy magazines. She was the kind of woman who noticed life where others rushed past. "So, Daniel," she asked lightly, pushing a strand of hair behind her ear, "why a blind date? You do not exactly look like someone desperate for company." He almost laughed at the irony. If only she knew. But instead of answering with the truth, he offered the safest reply. "Sometimes it is easier to meet someone when you do not have to pretend. No expectations. Just two strangers seeing where the evening goes." Emily smiled, and for a moment, Daniel wished that were the whole story. But time was merciless, and every tick of the clock dragged him closer to a future without the inheritance. Halfway through the meal, Daniel excused himself and stepped outside, pulling Michael aside. "She is different," he whispered. "She does not know me. She does not care about the money. Maybe she could be the one." Michael raised an eyebrow. "Are you serious? You cannot just drop a marriage proposal on a blind date." "I do not have a choice," Daniel muttered. By the time dessert arrived, Daniel knew he could not waste another day. The cafe lights glowed warmer, shadows stretched across the wooden table, and Emily traced circles on her cup as though she was deep in thought. That was when Daniel leaned forward, his voice lower, more deliberate. "Emily," he began, "this may sound insane. In fact, it is insane, but I need to tell you the truth." Her brow furrowed. "The truth about what?" He took a deep breath. "I am not here because I am searching for casual company. I am here because I need to be married within a week. If I do not, I lose everything. My family's estate, my position, my mother's legacy, all of it." Emily blinked, half expecting him to laugh, but his eyes held no trace of a joke. "You need to get married? To a stranger? That is not funny, Daniel." "Oh, I know how it sounds," he said quickly, "but listen. This is not about love at first sight or fairy tales. This is about survival. I am offering you an arrangement, a contract marriage. 1 year, nothing more. I will take care of your needs. I will ensure your family is provided for, and after that, we walk away. No strings attached." The words felt mechanical, rehearsed, like lines from a script he hated but had to perform. Emily sat frozen, her fingers gripping the edge of her sketchbook. "You are serious. You are actually serious." "Yes," Daniel admitted softly. "I wish I had time to explain more, to build trust the normal way. But I do not. What I can promise is this: I will never hurt you. You will be respected, protected, and free to leave once the year is over. All I ask is that you consider it." Silence stretched between them. The clatter of dishes, the laughter of families, the faint strains of Italian music, all of it faded beneath the weight of his words. Emily's heart pounded. She had never been offered something so outrageous, so impossible. A stranger, sitting across from her in a cafe, asking her to become his wife for reasons that sounded both desperate and dangerous. Finally, she whispered, "Why me? Out of all the women in New York, why would you choose someone you just met?" Daniel's answer came without hesitation. "Because you are the first person who has looked at me tonight and not seen a dollar sign." Emily stared at him, her sketchbook trembling in her hands. The proposal was reckless, it was madness, and yet, beneath the madness, there was something raw and painfully honest in his voice. The night outside pressed against the window, and inside that small cafe, two strangers sat at the edge of a decision that would alter both their lives forever. The next 48 hours blurred into a storm of paperwork, signatures, and hushed conversations with lawyers. Against every instinct screaming in her chest, Emily Carter signed her name on the marriage license beside Daniel Whitmore's. It was not a love story. It was a contract, stamped and sealed by the state of New York. When the courthouse doors closed behind them, Emily felt the weight of the decision settle on her shoulders. 1 year. 1 year of pretending to be Mrs. Whitmore, while the world believed in a love that did not exist. Daniel guided her into the waiting car, sleek and black, the kind that turned heads on city streets. Emily's reflection in the tinted window looked foreign to her. She was still the same girl from Brooklyn with paint under her fingernails, yet the title attached to her name had changed overnight. Arriving at the Whitmore penthouse was like stepping into another planet. Marble floors stretched beneath crystal chandeliers. Walls were lined with abstract art worth more than her entire apartment building, and the floor-to-ceiling windows opened to a sweeping view of Central Park. "This is where you live?" she whispered, her voice echoing in the cavernous foyer. Daniel nodded, almost embarrassed. "It is home, but it does not always feel like it." Their new life began with awkward silences and unspoken rules. A guest room was prepared for Emily. Complete with designer furniture she had never dreamed of touching. A maid offered to unpack her modest suitcase, but Emily insisted on doing it herself, clinging to the last fragments of independence she could grasp. At breakfast the next morning, she found Daniel already seated, scrolling through financial reports with a coffee mug in hand. The table stretched so long, she wondered if they would need microphones to speak to each other. "This is ridiculous," she muttered, sliding into the chair at the far end. "I feel like I'm eating in a hotel lobby." Daniel looked up, surprised by her candor. Then, for the first time, a genuine smile curved his lips. "Then move closer." Oh, it was a small moment, but it broke the ice. Still, the clashes were inevitable. Emily was used to simple meals, reheated pasta, and mismatched mugs. Daniel's world revolved around dinner parties with crystal stemware and guest lists that read like Forbes magazine. The first time she knocked over a glass of red wine onto an imported rug, the room went silent. Gasps filled the air from the house staff. But Daniel only grabbed a towel and dropped to his knees beside her. "It is just a rug. Do not worry." It was not the reaction anyone expected, not Emily, not the staff who stared wide-eyed. For Emily, it was the first crack in the image of Daniel Whitmore, the untouchable heir. Days turned into weeks. Publicly, they were photographed holding hands at charity galas and smiling under flashing cameras. Privately, they argued over trivial things, her clutter of sketchbooks on the pristine coffee table, his habit of working until dawn and forgetting meals. One evening, Emily found him asleep at his desk. His tie loosened, his head resting on a stack of papers. She hesitated, then draped a blanket over his shoulders. The smallest of gestures, unnoticed, but it lingered in her heart. Yet not everyone welcomed her presence. At a luncheon with Daniel's relatives, whispers circled like vultures. "She is a nobody. She must have married him for money. A girl from Brooklyn does not belong in the Whitmore family." Oh, Emily kept her chin high, but inside, the words stung. Later that night, when she returned to the penthouse, Daniel found her standing by the window, silent tears on her cheeks. "They think I am a joke," she said softly. "They will never accept me." Daniel's jaw tightened. For once, he set aside the contracts and the inheritance. He stepped closer and spoke with quiet certainty. "Let them talk. You are my wife. That is the only truth that matters right now." Emily turned to him, searching his eyes. It was still a marriage of paper and signatures, yet in that moment, something shifted, an invisible line blurring between contract and connection. And though neither dared to say it aloud, both of them felt the change. The contract said 1 year, nothing more. But time has a way of softening walls, and what began as obligation slowly began to resemble something dangerously close to real. It started in the smallest of ways. On a rainy Tuesday morning, Emily rushed out the door with her sketchbook clutched under her arm, determined to capture the storm clouds rolling over the Hudson. She slipped on the marble steps, nearly twisting her ankle. Before she could hit the ground, Daniel's hand caught her firmly, steadying her. "Careful," he said, his voice sharp with concern. She pulled away, embarrassed. "I am fine." But the truth was, her pulse was racing, not from the stumble, but from the warmth in his grip. Another night, Emily fell asleep on the couch, sketches scattered around her like fallen leaves. When she awoke, a blanket had been draped over her shoulders, and the sketches neatly stacked on the coffee table. She glanced toward Daniel's study, the door half closed, the light still glowing. He had noticed, and he had cared, without saying a word. The city outside remained ruthless. Gossip columns speculated endlessly about the Whitmore marriage. Was it too sudden? Too strange? Some wrote that Emily was after fortune. Others claimed Daniel had finally lost his mind. At a charity gala, one reporter shoved a microphone in Emily's face, asking if she had married for money. She froze under the flash of cameras. Daniel stepped in before she could answer, sliding his arm protectively around her waist. His voice was calm but resolute. "My wife does not need to explain herself to anyone. Our marriage is not up for debate." For Emily, the words were more than a shield. They were a promise, spoken publicly, in front of the very people who doubted her. Inside the penthouse, daily life grew less awkward. She brewed coffee for him in the mornings, and he surprised her by remembering how she liked her toast slightly burnt. When he worked too late, she left notes by his laptop reminding him to eat. Sometimes, he responded with quick scribbles on the same scraps of paper. "Thank you, good night, do not wait up." Little things, but they began to form a language of their own. One evening, during a blackout that swept across part of Manhattan, Emily lit candles in the living room. Daniel joined her, sitting cross-legged on the floor, as if he were a boy again, free of business titles and legacy burdens. She pulled out her sketchbook and began drawing by candlelight. "What are you sketching?" he asked. "Not what," she answered, her pencil moving steadily. "Who?" She turned the page toward him. His profile, softened by shadows, eyes tired but kind. Daniel stared, silent. No one had ever captured him without the armor of wealth or power. For the first time, he felt seen not as Whitmore, the heir, but simply as Daniel. A laugh escaped his lips, quiet but genuine. "You make me look better than I deserve." Emily smiled faintly. "No, that is how I see you." The air between them shifted. It was not dramatic, not fireworks exploding across the sky, but something subtler, more dangerous. A seed planted in silence, waiting to grow. Days later, Daniel fell ill after a long trip to Boston for business. Feverish, he tried to wave off the concern, but Emily insisted on staying by his side. She placed a cool cloth on his forehead, brewed herbal tea, and sat with him through the night. At dawn, he opened his eyes to find her asleep in a chair beside the bed, her hand still resting lightly on his arm. It was in that quiet morning that Daniel realized the contract no longer felt like a shield. It felt like a prison against something his heart wanted but could not name. Emily, too, found herself torn. Every time she looked at him, she reminded herself that this marriage had an expiration date. And yet, every small kindness, every unguarded smile, made the truth harder to ignore. The line between duty and desire was blurring, and neither of them could stop it. The fragile peace they had built could not last forever. For every quiet smile exchanged in the privacy of their penthouse, there were a dozen pairs of eyes waiting to see them fail. It began with whispers. A tabloid columnist printed a story claiming that Daniel Whitmore's sudden marriage was nothing but a business arrangement. The article mentioned how Emily had no background, no wealth, no family connections, only a modest job and a face the public had never seen until now. At first, Daniel dismissed it. "People will always talk," he told her, sliding the newspaper into the trash. But Emily could not ignore the headlines that followed her at the grocery store, the murmurs that chased her at charity events. She had entered his world, but she had not been invited to belong. The tension grew heavier when a distant cousin of Daniel's, Victoria, confronted them at a family dinner. Her smile was polished, her words laced with poison. "Tell me, Emily, how does a girl from Brooklyn find herself married to a Whitmore? Surely it was not love at first sight, was it?" Emily's hands trembled under the table. Before she could respond, Daniel's chair scraped against the marble floor. He leaned forward, his voice low but firm. "Enough, Victoria. My wife owes no one an explanation. If you cannot respect her, then you do not respect me." But the damage was already done. Rumors spread faster than truth, and soon, reporters began digging deeper. One afternoon, Emily returned from the art store to find a man lingering near the building entrance with a camera. "Mrs. Whitmore," he called, snapping photos as she tried to walk past. "Is it true your marriage is only a contract?" Her breath caught. "What did you say?" "You heard me. People are saying you will not last a year. Care to comment?" Emily hurried inside, her heart pounding. The walls of the penthouse, once a refuge, now felt like a cage, closing in. That evening, when Daniel came home, she confronted him. "They know," she said, her voice shaking. "Someone is leaking information. They are asking if we are a contract. Daniel, if this gets out..." His jaw tightened. "It will not. I will handle it." But Emily could see the storm in his eyes. He was a man used to controlling boardrooms and stock markets, not human hearts and gossip columns. The following week, at a charity auction, the storm finally broke. A rival businessman raised his glass in mock celebration and said loudly enough for the crowd to hear, "To Daniel Whitmore and his paper bride, May the contract be as profitable as the estate. Gasps rippled through the room. Cameras flashed. Emily froze under the weight of every stare. In that single moment, the secret they had guarded so carefully teetered on the edge of exposure. Daniel stepped forward, shielding her with his presence. But inside, both of them knew the truth. They could not outrun the rumors forever. The marriage that had begun as a contract was no longer just their secret. It was a target. And the more they tried to deny it, the closer the world would come to tearing them apart. The rumors no longer whispered at the edges. They roared in headlines, blared across social media, and followed Emily wherever she went. One morning, she opened the door to find a swarm of reporters on the sidewalk. Microphones thrust forward, cameras flashing like lightning in a storm. Mrs. Whitmore. Is it true your marriage is fake? Did Daniel pay you to marry him? Are you in this only for the inheritance? Emily froze, her breath short and shallow. Daniel's driver pushed through the crowd, guiding her into the car, but the damage was done. Her name was now a spectacle, her dignity reduced to speculation. Inside the penthouse, she clutched her sketchbook to her chest, as if it could shield her from the world outside. Daniel, they know. They are saying everything. How long before they find proof? Daniel ran a hand through his hair, pacing the room. There is no proof. No one outside this house knows the details. It is just gossip. But Emily shook her head. Gossip does not leave bruises. This does. I cannot even walk down the street without being called a fraud. Ah. The final blow came at a charity gala hosted by the Whitmore Foundation. It was supposed to be a night of elegance, of polished speeches and diamond chandeliers. Instead, it turned into a courtroom of public opinion. Halfway through the evening, a journalist stood up, her recorder already running. Mr. Whitmore, can you confirm or deny that your marriage is nothing more than a contractual arrangement designed to secure your inheritance? The ballroom fell silent. Every eye turned toward Daniel. Emily's hands went cold, her body rigid beside him. This was the moment they had feared, the line between rumor and truth crumbling under the weight of a single question. Daniel opened his mouth, but before he could answer, Victoria the cousin, who had always sneered, rose with a triumphant smile. Of course it is a contract, she declared. Do not insult our intelligence. A girl like her marrying into this family overnight? It is laughable. She tricked him, and now she is parading in jewels she never earned. The crowd erupted in whispers, phones lifted to capture every word. Emily's vision blurred. She wanted to disappear, to run back to Brooklyn and the quiet streets where no one knew her name. Daniel stood frozen, torn between silence and truth. The inheritance, his family's empire, the promise he had made, it all pressed down on him. But then he looked at Emily, her face pale, her eyes brimming with humiliation. In that instant, something inside him shifted. He stepped forward, his voice cutting through the noise. Enough. My wife is not a fraud. She is not a trick. Yes, we married under unusual circumstances. Yes, it began as an arrangement. But what none of you understand is this. What began as a contract has become the most real thing in my life. Gasps echoed across the ballroom. Cameras clicked furiously. Victoria's smirk faltered. Daniel turned to Emily, his words no longer for the crowd but for her. I will not hide anymore. Not from them, not from you, not from myself. They can take the money, the estate, the empire. None of it matters if it costs me you. Emily's lips parted, stunned. Around them, the world was still buzzing with scandal, but for the first time, she felt seen, defended, and chosen not for what she could give, but for who she was. And though the revelation came like a storm, it carried with it the first spark of freedom. The gala ended in chaos. Reporters swarmed the exits, microphones thrust forward, cameras catching every tear that glistened in Emily's eyes. Daniel tried to shield her, but the damage was irreversible. By the time they reached the car, Emily was trembling, her sketchbook clutched against her chest as though it were the last piece of herself she still owned. Back at the penthouse, silence suffocated the air. Daniel reached for her hand, but she pulled away. Do you hear yourself? She whispered, her voice raw. You admitted it in front of everyone. You told them it began as an arrangement. Do you know what that makes me look like? A liar, a fraud, a woman who sold herself. Daniel's chest tightened. I was trying to protect you. I wanted them to know the truth about what we have become. Her laugh was bitter, broken. Protect me? You have destroyed me, Daniel. I was never part of your world, and now I never will be. To them, I am nothing but a scandal. To myself, I am a mistake." She turned toward the window, the city glowing beneath them like a cruel reminder of everything she had lost. "I cannot do this anymore. I cannot live in a marriage where my name is a weapon for others to use. I am walking away." "Emily, do not—" His voice cracked, but she raised a trembling hand. "No, Daniel, this is not about inheritance, or family, or contracts. This is about me. I need to leave, before I lose every piece of who I am." That night, Emily packed her suitcase. The penthouse, once foreign and overwhelming, now felt like a gilded prison. She left behind the designer dresses, the jewels, the privileges. All she carried was her sketchbook, her clothes, and the dignity she refused to surrender. Daniel watched from the doorway, powerless. His empire could buy him everything, except the one thing he wanted most: her. The elevator doors closed, and with them, the fragile hope he had nurtured collapsed. For the first time, the heir to the Whitmore fortune stood alone, stripped of certainty, left with nothing but silence echoing through a penthouse too big for one man. And for Emily, the night air of Brooklyn felt colder than ever, but at least it was her own. Days turned into nights, and the penthouse grew quieter without Emily's presence. Daniel walked through rooms that now echoed with emptiness, each corner reminding him of her laughter over burnt toast, her sketches scattered across the coffee table, her voice soft but firm when she defended her place in a world that had rejected her. He had spent his life fighting for numbers, assets, and power. But when he lost Emily, he understood that none of it mattered. The inheritance, the empire, the Whitmore name it, was all hollow without her beside him. One evening, Daniel sat in his late mother's study, staring at the clause in her will. "Married within 1 week, to inherit." The words no longer chained him. Instead, they mocked him, reminding him of the contract that had started everything. He realized then what his mother had intended all along: not a marriage of convenience, but a test of character. True love could not be built on paper. It had to be proven through action. So Daniel made his choice. He called his lawyers and told them to release a statement to the press. The Whitmore heir would no longer pursue his claim to the estate. If marriage was the price of fortune, he would pay with freedom instead. The announcement shook the city. Headlines screamed of a billionaire's son walking away from billions. Critics called him reckless. Shareholders panicked, but Daniel did not care. For once, he was living not as a Whitmore, but as a man who knew exactly what he wanted. He found Emily at a small gallery in Brooklyn, where her sketches were displayed for the first time. She stood quietly in the corner, avoiding the curious glances of strangers. When she saw Daniel step inside, her breath caught. "What are you doing here?" she asked, her voice tight. He walked toward her, unflinching. "I came to tell you the truth. I gave it up, Emily. The estate, the inheritance, all of it. I walked away because I finally understand. None of that means anything if it costs me you." Her eyes widened. "You gave it up?" "Yes," he said firmly. "I would rather be a poor man with you than a wealthy man alone. You once asked why I chose you. The answer is simple. Because when you look at me, you see Daniel, not Whitmore. And that is the man I want to be." The gallery had gone silent, every guest watching the scene unfold. Daniel dropped to one knee, not with a diamond from his family vault, but with a modest silver ring he had bought himself. "This time, there is no contract, no inheritance, no condition, just me, asking you to marry me for real. Emily Carter, will you be my wife not for a year, but for life?" Tears welled in her eyes as the room held its breath. The gallery was silent, every eye fixed on Daniel as he knelt on one knee. His voice did not tremble, his gaze did not waver. For the first time, he was not the heir to an empire. He was simply a man asking for the woman he loved. Emily's tears spilled freely, her hands covering her mouth. The memory of humiliation, of whispers, of headlines, branding her a fraud, all of it clashed with the truth standing before her now. Daniel had walked away from everything the world said mattered, and he had done it for her. Slowly, she lowered her hands, her voice breaking. "Yes, Daniel. Yes, I will marry you." Applause erupted across the gallery. Strangers cheering for a love that had fought its way through doubt and fire. Daniel slipped the modest silver ring onto her finger, and for the first time, Emily felt like more than a name in a scandal. She was his choice, his partner, his future. In the days that followed, the press tried to spin the story. Some called Daniel foolish for abandoning his fortune. Others tried to paint Emily as manipulative, claiming she had lured him away from his legacy. But the truth was louder than the lies. The public watched the sincerity in Daniel's voice, the way he defended her, the way he held her hand in every photograph. Slowly, the narrative changed. Victoria, whose venom had nearly ruined them, was exposed for leaking private information to the press. Her attempt to discredit Emily backfired, and she was removed from the family trust. Justice, long overdue, finally arrived. As for Daniel and Emily, they chose a small wedding in Brooklyn, surrounded not by chandeliers and cameras, but by close friends and neighbors who had known Emily before her name was ever tied to Whitmore. She wore a simple gown, he wore a navy suit, and when they exchanged vows, there was no contract, no condition, no countdown, only a promise spoken with truth. Afterward, they walked hand in hand down the quiet streets, free of the empire's weight. The inheritance was gone, but in its place, they had built something far greater: trust, respect, and love. Daniel glanced at her, a smile tugging at his lips. My mother was right, you know. She believed marriage should be about more than wealth or appearances. She believed it should be real. And with you, Emily, it finally island. Emily leaned against him, her sketchbook tucked under her arm, the symbol of the life she had carried with her all along. Then let us make our own empire, Daniel. Not built on money, but on us. And under the fading light of the Brooklyn sky, the billionaire's son and the girl from the blind date sealed their story not with signatures on paper, but with a kiss that belonged only to them. Their contract marriage had ended. Their real love had just begun.